Hey guys, Brassfax here, out in broad-ass daylight to talk about night vision. Specifically to talk about the mono to dual pore pipeline. I think anyone that's ever bought night vision that didn't have an unlimited budget knows exactly what I'm talking about. Because you go out and you're like, wow, dual tubes sure are cool. And then you see the price tag and you're like, wow, dual tubes sure aren't that cool. So you go and buy a PVS 14. But then you really quickly realize that there are a number of options on the market to take your PVS 14 and buy a second PVS 14, smush them together, and boom shakalaka, you got your dual tubes. Now, I think no one is under any delusion that this is not going to be nearly as effective as just buying a dual tube, a dedicated dual tube housing outright. Of course not, right? It's not a dedicated style housing. But it has a number of benefits. For starters, you're able to buy night vision now-ish, right, with the savings that you got, and begin training, beginning buying ancillary equipment, getting used to using it, right? All that stuff, which is actually significantly more important than the capability given to you by dual tubes. And then, funds permitting, down the line, eventually you can buy that second tube and then smush it all together with a bridged and get a pretty satisfactory project. And I'm gonna talk about a number of those options here today.
This video is sponsored by Modern Warriors. When I'm making this video, I've only released one Modern Warrior sponsorship at this point, but man, for the first one, I got quite the response for a sponsor. Yes, that was the Helldiver Warping sound. The fact that there are so many satisfied customers in my comment section for a retailer in St. George? Yeah, that's pretty cool. For those that might have missed it, Modern Warriors is a physical, mid to high-end gun store in St. George that also has a super robust online presence where you can buy a range of often hard-to-find items. They also handle FFL transfers with little to no hassle, just tell them when and where. If you use my discount code down below in the description, you will save 10% off. I can't actually link to Modern Warriors because YouTube will in fact bend me over if I link to a gun website, but I trust you guys to know how to at least use Google. Just type in Modern Warriors, you're off to the races. Alright, back to night vision autism. Okay, so you spent the last 2 years running your PVS 14 monocular. You've just won the lottery, saved up enough money, or just said fuck it and liquidated some of your kids' college savings because what the hell is self-control, and you're buying another PVS 14 to complete your dual tube Exodia. All bridges use the same camera screw hole that your J-arm previously used, so it's really as simple as screw it in and you're off to the races. I have my NVB58 in a increased field of view configuration. If you're curious about that, go watch my review on it, which is why it ends up looking so silly. But the MVB can actually be also run in a standard tubes forward style configuration if you want to run it more traditionally. Similarly, the panel bridge allows for complete articulation, so you can run it in every weird, wacky way that you want. Splayed out, increased field of view, one eye left, one eye right, one eye up. It's up to you. In fact, this increased field of view thing with bridge PVS 14s are really the only way to get this increased field of view while also maintaining articulations. If all we're doing is screwing in an extra tube, there's no electronics in the bridge, so if you want, you can jettison one of the tubes and run a thermal fusion type setup. That's easily done as well. As you can see, functionally speaking, bridge PVS 14 setups aren't just not limited, they actually have a large degree of flexibility and features, more so than your typical dedicated dual tube housing. I personally ran a bridge setup for the majority of my time under night vision, about 3 years worth. It's a good setup and it works just fine. That being said, let's not overdose on copium here. While PVS 14 setups on paper mostly exceed the capabilities of traditional dual tube housings, the weight and other soft factors still have the purpose-built dual tubes winning out for most general usage. Except if you want increased field of view, though that is about to rapidly change from what I've seen at SHOT Show 2024. Let's talk about that weight real quick because it's bad, really bad. Even with silly light bridges like the panel bridge at 1.7 ounces, you're stuck with 2 batteries, 2 controllers, 2 switches, 2 PVS 14s, 2 independent units with redundant parts. End result is basically any setup is going to weigh 25 to 28 ounces. Your typical mid-weight dual tube setup is going to be about 20 ounces, with the lightweight ones being just over 16. That might not seem like a large weight difference at first, but we're mounting almost 2 pounds of weight on the worst place on the human body to handle that much weight. Neck. Well, actually, your balls would be a worse place to mount, but whatever. Also, these are so heavy, you're often going to need to actually have an aggressive counterweight to balance out the weight of the night vision units itself, further ballooning the weight sitting on top of your noggin. All in all, this is manageable. I've done so for many years, But these are absolutely neck strain generators and a serious suckfest for really long nights shooting with the boys. But it's not just weight. When you buy a dual tube setup, the assembler will almost always seek to match tube types, match tube specs, collimate, to ensure the best looking image. The dual tubes are also simply, well, simpler. It's one controller, one off-on button, massively reduced bulk, and you only need to worry about a single battery. The arms are also not going to be needed to be retightened as often as I often find with these plastic 3D printed bridged housings. If you want adjustable gain, you don't need the faff with trying to match two gain knobs, and frankly, the form factor and build quality of a dedicated tube housing is much more fitting for the insane price tag that you're going to be spending on these things. I mean, seriously, look at this versus this. Yeah, I think that says it all, right? So if you're set on duals and you have the money, just go buy duals. You're not actually saving any money down the line if you go down the mono dual pour pipeline. The PVS-14 is the cheapest unit on the market, but two of them plus a $200 to $300 bridge ends up costing way more than a mid-tier dual housing. Despite all this, the mono dual pour pipeline is about getting night vision now while leaving the door open in the future to upgrade to a dual setup. It's not going to be perfect.
All right, let's get to the focus of the video. These guys right here. These are Nocturne Industries Tantos combined together, two of them, with a Daisho housing or Daisho bridge, which kind of blocks them all together and, as you can see, creates a dual tube setup. These to me are the ultimate version of have something designed from the ground up to eventually end up like this, right? Real quick, I've been running these guys for about 6 months. It's a 3D printed housing, so I wanted to put a lot of wear and tear on it, not just for durability, right? If I go face first in a wall, which I actually did do. CQB in a dark house, what can I say, man? But as well as the articulation, like how would the articulation handle itself? It's plastic on plastic, right? So does it smooth itself out and kind of become useless? How well does this thing handle being, turned into a mono, turned into a dual, turned into a mono, so on and so forth. I capstoned that by going to the Moons Out Forgotten Weapon shoot over in Virginia, running it there. I also handed it off to my buddy Luke, and he ran it for that entire trip basically as well. Real quick, the homies over at Nocturne Industries did sort of give me this thing. I paid for the guts, the most expensive part, the tubes, right? One of them was my tube, and then I bought a second tube off of them. But they provided the Tanto body and the actual bridge component. So, disclaimers on the table, and thank you, Nocturne.
This reminds me of home.
Can I help you with something? Should I hold it?
This setup is functionally two different SKUs. The pod is the Nocturne Tanto PVS-14. It's all the guts of your regular night vision tube put into a new 3D printed lightweight housing. You do lose the onboard illuminator, but who cares? Yeah, I know. One person in the comments going to be like, hey, hi, it's me. I'm the one that cares. I'm using them. But for everyone else, I've almost never seen someone use the onboard illuminator, as they're really not much more than IR/ND hazards most of the time. You also lose manual gain control, which is a bit more of a sting, but hey, eyes on the prize, fellas. Remember, we're going for a lightweight mono to dual pour pipeline. Some features are getting jettisoned. In all other ways, it acts more or less like a regular PVS-14, except it takes CR123s instead of AA batteries. I actually prefer that. Not that I have a problem with running AA's, but when you compare the Energizer lithiums with CR123s, you're not really actually saving all that much money. And literally all of my other gear, flashlight, other night vision, whatever, all uses CR123s, so it's convenient not to need to carry around a alternate battery type that only works in my PVS-14. Combine this with the weight savings of about 3, almost 4 ounces compared to your PVS-14, and the Tanto itself is actually just a decent monocular. In fact, if you just take 2 Tantos without the bridge and then put them in the aforementioned bridges, you actually save a ton of weight. Price is about $1,000, which puts it about $200, maybe $300 over your standard PVS-14. The magic happens though when you take the leap and buy a second Tanto and the Daisho bridge. You, with a garage beer, a single Allen key, can rig this up in under 30 seconds. These 2 prongs replace the batteries, screw them in, remove one of the battery caps, and you have a dual tube setup. Didn't really even need the beer. While we lack some of the nifty features of a bridged 14, there are some upsides here too. It has an auto off when we fold the tube backs, comes with an IDP stop, and removal of the need of a second battery drops the weight all the way down to 21 ounces, basically identical to my AR NVGs. It also retains the unique feature of being able to parse out night vision to the homies, simply unscrew it, thing pops out, put it all together, you're good to go. The pricing model on this thing isn't even that bad either. $1,700 for 2 Tantos and a bridge, so no tubes, no glass, no nothing, which is not bad at all compared to something like a Katana, DTNVGs, DTNVSs, ARNVGs, whatever. I think really only the 1431s beat it out in terms of actual raw pricing.
So despite all that, I think there's one really important question to answer, because all the features are cool and all, yeah, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't really matter if it comes out of the box, it comes out of the setup, and it's kind of a janky piece of shit. And I'm sure there are several of you in the audience that saw 3D printed and instantly thought, wow, that kind of sucks. In fact, the biggest 3D printed hater of all time, Hop, who has also ironically reviewed multiple night vision devices that have been 3D printed, I asked him to weigh in on his thoughts with this compared to those options. With those options, I mean, you can go watch his reviews on them. A lot of them tend to be kind of cruddy, right? You articulate it, the whole thing doesn't move evenly, it kind of bumps around like ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. It's got a bunch of play, especially if you flex it at all. The plastic is just really not doing the overall quality any favors. But when I handed this off to him, he played with it, put it on his head, pressed all the buttons, finangled it, diddled it, thought it was great. I'm happy to report, even when comparing it to a very nice high-end housing like these ARNVGs, the Tanto bridge holds up very well. When we articulate it, it's nice and smooth. I can flex on it. There's no weird abnormal play or whatever you want to call it. All the things screw in nicely. Everything holds in position. When you rotate it down, the goggles don't want to move when you're running around. And overall, it feels like a really, actually quite solid product.
Now, it's important to be very specific with wording here. If you took basically all of those nods on the list I just showed you, put them on a table with this thing, would I ever pick this dual tube setup? No, it's actually kind of mid, for the lack of a better term. It's a little heavier than most. It's certainly much more bulky than most dedicated dual tube housings, and there's really nothing on it that really makes it stand out. And me personally, I generally prefer metal style dual tube housings. But that's the thing, this allows you to buy all the pieces a la carte over a longer period of time, and at the end of all that, you get a distinctly middle of the pack dual tube setup. Compared to two PVS-14s strapped together, way better. And then compared to something like a DTNVS or ARNVGs, dedicated housing, the fact that it can keep up just fine, it's just a little worse in terms of value, in terms of construction, weight, and durability, which in the context of something that started life as a monocular, is pretty damn good. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you fellas in the next one.
Sit pretty. Nova, sit pretty.
Wow, that sucked.
It's late though. Sit pretty.
Make her roll over. She can do that.
No.
Her back hurts. She has really bad back.
Oh, I love her so much. I can't.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, baby.
What a good girl.
You're my darling. Mwah.
What a good
You're such a good girl. Even if you don't do anything, I still love you so much. Yeah. What a pretty girl.
This is why Hop has no girlfriend. My dog is her girlfriend.
He already has a girlfriend.